What's up, ADHD reWired listeners? Our fall registration kickoff event is happening this week on Thursday, August 17th at 12 p.m. Pacific, 3 p.m. Eastern. This is the only registration event for this fall where we're going to be giving $800 off select sections. Go to coachingrewired.com for more info and to get your name added to our fall interest list. And if you are wondering what group coaching can do for you and what our coaching and accountability groups are all about, go to coachingrewired.com. Get your name added to our fall interest list and start your pre-registration process by going to coachingrewired.com. More info at the break. Now, on with the show.
I think the first and most important thing is get a diagnosis. Get a diagnosis. And that's a huge thing for our community, right? Because with these things, right, with a lot of the things I was talking about earlier, like the last thing that you want to do is put another label on yourself as a Black person. You know, you're like, shit, I already got enough labels.
Welcome back to another episode of ADHD Rewired. Today's guest is Vernon T. Foster II. His name goes with the bio too, because I had to learn a new word that Vernon just taught me. So let's see how I do with this. Vernon is an author, podcaster, and self-proclaimed sommelier. How did I do? Pretty good?
Yeah, you did good. You got it.
All right. Sommelier of video marketing. He's passionate about sharing his experience as a Black man living with ADHD and creating community. Vernon, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me, Eric. Glad to be here, man.
Glad to have you, and thanks for teaching me a new Scrabble word, which is, I guess,
great.
Defined as like PhD of winery or something like that.
Indeed.
All right. So tell me, who are you?
Yeah, it's been quite the journey in figuring that out, and it's still a process. I would say that I'm just a guy trying to figure out this journey of ADHD, navigating life through the ups and downs, the wins, the losses, and the lessons, and just trying to, make my dent in the universe, as Steve Jobs once said. For the people who like him, for the people who don't, it's okay. But yeah, it's been quite the journey. I've had a lot of different jobs, been involved in a lot of different projects, and excited to come on and just talk to the audience today and see if there's any wisdom in my story or the things that I've been through that could help the people listening today.
Awesome. So you were diagnosed just about a year ago, right?
Yeah. Actually, it was 36. So it was about 2 years ago. Yeah, no.
Okay.
Yeah.
You also shared with me during our initial conversation that you've maybe been fired from a couple jobs.
Oh yeah, I've been fired from a lot of jobs. It's kind of like sad. I think there's 20 or something. It's crazy. It's a crazy amount. And maybe I'm exaggerating a little bit there, but yeah, my most recent job, I was, terminated from my very first job when I was 18. Worked in a pizza place, Donato's Pizza. I don't even know if they're around anymore. Okay pizza. Cool people though. But yeah, I was eventually terminated from that job. You have enough of these L's, you take enough of these L's, and you start to kind of ask yourself, is there something wrong with me? Or like, am I not doing something right? Do I not have all of the things that everybody else has, right? And if you're not careful, if you're not self-aware and you don't have the tools, that could easily be turned into, a judgment of yourself, and you can get down on yourself and beat yourself up. So I kind of took it on the chin and learned that those things just weren't for me. They weren't strong enough to keep me engaged in my interests long enough for me to stick with them. And I think for the longest time before I was diagnosed with ADHD, I just said, oh man, this is just who I am, right? I'm a floater. I'm kind of a gypsy of sorts, right? I try things, I experiment. My life is a laboratory, right? And it's my job to go and do these different things, go write books, go start podcasts, interview people, work with video, right? Then you come to this place where you're like, oh, well, I guess I'm not as unique as I thought I was. I have ADHD.
So what was it that sort of led you to ADHD?
So funny story. I think there's always been like hints of it, but I never really connected the dots. but I'll jump back to kind of like earlier on where like people that are listening to those, I'll be like, of course, like they've probably had similar stories. So when I was in elementary school, when I was in the third grade, I went to public school. I was the kid who wouldn't shut up. I was like, I don't think they knew what to do with me, Eric. Like I would always kind of shout out of turn. I joke and say I had my own chair in the principal's office. I was the kid who was super hyper. Like I love being outside. Being indoors felt restrictive. Sitting down for hours on end felt restrictive. And eventually it was brought to my mother's attention that I had what they called at that time SLD, slow learning disability, slow development disability. I don't know exactly the terminology,
Okay.
right? But it was basically they were saying, hey, your son has this issue. He's not picking up the information well. He doesn't really pay attention. He calls out of turn, right? Like we don't really know what to do with him. So we want to put him in a special class. And it's a class where people are developing slower, that maybe they need extra help. And she was like, hell no, I ain't having that. Like black moms, they don't play around. Like you talk about the kid, you trying to, like they weren't having it. Or she wasn't having that. So that was like kind of like an early telltale sign. I didn't know at the time, right? It was just like, I just thought that I was being transferred to a different school because it wasn't working out. Fast forward, that next year, my mom put me in a private school where it was very much focused on, I think it's more of a holistic curriculum. There was arts, there was language, there was play and all, sports and right, very diverse curriculum. And the classes were a lot smaller. I think in my elementary school, there's probably like 20 or 30 kids. In my private school, there was probably like 10 or so of us or something like that. So smaller class size obviously means like you get more one-on-one time with the attention, and the teachers, I'm not sure where they found these teachers, but they're very compassionate, right? They very much took their time with me. They understood that, yeah, maybe this kid, he's definitely unique in his own way. So that was kind of like telltale sign early on. Had I known about ADHD and what all this stuff meant or diagnosis, I didn't know anything at that time. And I think for my mom and probably for a lot of families that are, Black, Latino, they may look at these things as kind of like labeling their kids, and they don't want to do that, right? They don't want their kids to believe they're less than, because there's already enough obstacles that we have in our way, right? There's already enough barriers that we have to cross. So it's like, if you're going to tell my son that they have a learning disability, I'm not having that shit. Like, hopefully I can cuss, sorry, or we can edit that out. And so that was the early telltale sign. Now, fast forward to
What was like the makeup of your school? Was it a diverse school or?
It was white. It was all white kids.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
I was used to being the token Black kid, pretty much.
Did you feel that? How did you feel that? And do you think that part of the way they were trying to help you was like, what do you think there was some like, I don't know, like covert racism in there? Like, even if it wasn't,
probably. Yeah, probably. I mean, I grew up in like the school I went to was like backwoods then, right? And I mean, I didn't know it at that time, right? I wasn't aware of it. Like as a kid, you're not really aware of those things, right? You're not conscious, right? You're just like, I'm a kid, I'm like everybody else, man, fun, eating popsicles, eating pudding, yeah. But I do believe that there was like some of that going on, like, or maybe like it was if a teacher isn't they've only taught certain students, right? And they only have a idea of what a Black kid is based on what they see on TV, or like, oh, he's probably a criminal, or like, so maybe they're treating me a little bit different than they would treat other kids, right? So I would say that was probably some of that there. Yeah.
All right, so you're going to fast forward a bit.
Yeah, so fast forward to, and I'm going to skip middle school, but we can go back there because I was definitely a problem child in middle school. My mom actually came to school with me, so I didn't get kicked out of school. They were like, if you don't come to school with your kid, then she actually suggested that. She said, hey, if you don't kick my kid out of school, I'll come to school with him for a week and make sure he stays in line. So my mom actually came to school with me for a week. And at first I was pissed because I was like, this sucks. I'm going to look like an idiot. But it actually turned out to work in my favor because all the girls were like, Vernon, your mom is so nice. And I was like, yeah, my mom's nice. Yeah. So it actually worked out in my favor. but that, that's like that was kind of like a little story that I thought I'd throw in there. But fast forward to college. So I went to Florida State University. By the grace of God and the universe, they let me in. I was definitely not an academic, but I was definitely a C student. I struggled, dude. And in college, in these classrooms, like when you get into these bigger universities, because I transferred from a community college, they have classrooms where there's like hundreds of people. Like there was like this. I remember, I think it was like my finance class, Banesh. It was like a principles of finance or intro to finance. Dude, it was stadium seating in the classroom. And it was like taking a test in there was overwhelming. So I discovered I had this thing called test anxiety, because every time I would go in these classrooms and they'd have this timer on the screen and pass out the Scantrons, and I'm usually like the last one, if not the last one. And I'm like, I'm having to kind of like hurry up and like bubble things in.
Oh, I hated the bubbles. They're like, I whenever I hear the word Scantron, the number of times that I would get to the end of like the test and realize like it's a 50-question test and I'm just filling in the 49th thing, but it's the last question, and I realized, oh crap, I missed what. And like the number of times I did that was like just painful.
Yeah, I feel you, man. I feel you. So I'm taking these tests and I'm like bombing these tests, right? And you only have a couple of, back then it's like you have like the first test in the beginning of the semester, you have like the midterms, and then you have the final, right?
Yeah. So like 2 or 3 tests in a paper, like that's your grade.
Yeah, if you fail 1 or 2 tests, you're already screwed, right? Like there's no turning back. So I'm in the first semester and I'm like, yeah, this isn't gonna work. So I of all people, I reached out to my brother. I go, hey man, this is what's going on with me. And he's like, hey, you got to go down to the testing center, man. And I'm like, well, the testing center, it's like, it was almost like this hidden secret, that like this cheat code that like no one knew about, right? And it was like, oh, you got to go down to the testing center and you got to like get tested for test anxiety. And if they see that you have a disability, then they'll give you more time, man. And I'm like, dude, you didn't tell me this? I'm over here struggling my ass off, trying to make it through finance. And so I go down to the testing center. They do this whole diagnostic thing. I mean, it took like an hour and a half, like I'm spacing out. And so come to find out, when they do their research, they put together, I still have this document. It's like a 30-page document that they've done all these diagnostic tests. I had to do these, like I had to answer questions. I had to take a test. Basically, I had to do a test for them to do the test on me to get the result, for them to be like, all right, there's something that's not quite right with like how you like compute information, and therefore we're able to give you extended time. So that was like the cheat code, Super Mario Brothers, unlock. Now I got time and a half. So if the test was an hour, I got an extra hour and a half, right? So that actually gave me less anxiety, because I'm in a room with like a proctor, which is somebody who like oversees, right? And then like there's like maybe like 1 or 2 other people in there that have like a similar thing, right? And so that was actually the cheat code that helped me get through college. That, some Adderall and late night library hours. I don't know that I would have been able to get through it. So when I look back on my life, that was call out number 1 was elementary. Call out number 2 was the testing center. And call out number 3 was, I was 36. I was working in New York at this tech startup. I've been there in this role for probably, at that time, it was 2.5 years. And I was just kind of like, just floundering. Like I just wasn't able to, I don't know if I just wasn't able to get the energy, or I wasn't doing the things that I needed to do. I couldn't even like motivate myself. It was just like every day I'd wake up and I'd be like, all right, I know I got to do this. And I just sit in front of my computer and I'd barely like eke out 1 or 2 tasks. I saw this coming down the pipe and I was like, dude, I'm going to get fired. Like this is what happens every job that I've had, right? I get to this
I know
point
this pattern.
Yeah, I spot it, right? I was like, I'm toast if I don't figure this out, right? I can't get fired from my job, like it was a series of things that happened that led to a conversation with the guy who is in HR. He was like, hey man, I noticed like you're in meetings and stuff. And he's like, I see you. He's like, have you ever been tested for ADHD? I was like, nah, man, no. He's like, I think you got ADHD. You should probably go get tested for ADHD. Okay. I guess at this point, I mean, I'll try anything. I'm pretty desperate. So that was the genesis in terms of me getting the diagnosis. I go and I remember taking this test. There's this one test, and I don't know if you know what this is, Eric, but there's a test that they do where it's like these different colors, and then there's names by the colors, and then they
the Stroop
switch.
test.
The Stroop test.
Yep.
The Stroop test got me. That made me feel like an idiot, right?
And for listeners that don't know, that it's literally the names of colors like that are written out, except like the word yellow is like in green, and the word red is in like blue. And so it's keeping a rule set in mind to inhibit one piece of stimuli to be able to focus on another. Like it's kind of a working memory and inhibition task. It's way harder than you might think.
Dude, that broke me. That broke me. So she ends up doing all the tests, and then she does the analysis, and she sat down and she was like, how have you made it this far through life?
It's so funny.
Like,
when I got my test in college, like the psychiatrist said almost the exact same words. Man.
She was shocked. She was like, I don't know how you got to this point, but like, yeah, I have a lot of empathy for you. Like, she felt bad for me. Just felt like really bad, you know?
Did you tell her that's because your mom went to school with you?
My mom had a lot of, no, I was just like, I think on one hand, it was like, damn, the 5 phases of grief or whatever it is, right? But then on the other hand, it was like, I'm pretty strong. I'm pretty tough, man, to be able to endure like life with one hand behind your back the whole time, right? Trying to play the game, right? So it felt like a weight was kind of lifted. It was like, okay, like everything kind of makes sense.
Well, let me ask you this before we had to break. You mentioned when you were in college that one of the things that helped you after you got that evaluation at the testing center was Adderall. Was that prescribed Adderall? Or
no.
Oh, okay.
No.
All right.
That was like your boy knows somebody who knows somebody at the Greek house who knows somebody.
I mean, that's so uncommon on college campuses. Yeah, no. It's and for all of you college folks listening, so you might not realize this because you probably have gotten help getting your medication filled at this point in your life. But when you actually become an adult where you actually have to do all of the things on your own, it is a pain in the ass of all the hoops we got to jump through to get our meds filled. And part of it is because they're trying to eliminate medication diversion, which is what happens, what it's called on those college campuses when someone with ADHD is giving meds to somebody without ADHD. Right? Please don't do that if you are prescribed ADHD meds, because it actually makes it harder for all of us.
Yeah, I'll just add that, like, I wouldn't recommend that either, because you don't know what you're taking, especially on college campuses, and there's all kinds of stuff floating out there. I was just desperate. I basically used it to cram before my exams, and I'd spend like 6 hours, 7 hours, 8 hours overnight in the library. It wasn't super effective for me because I just wake up the next morning and I'm like groggy, and I remember like half the things that I was studying, right? Like it was a terrible like strategy, but like, again, I was desperate and I did whatever I had to do. I wouldn't recommend anyone doing that. Please get a diagnosis, seek professional help, right? All that stuff, if that's the route you're going to go.
I do want to also share a test taking strategy, but before we do that, I want to take a quick break and we will be right back. Support for this podcast comes from ADHD reWired's coaching and accountability groups. Have you ever wondered if it's possible to live the kind of life that you want with ADHD? What would it be worth to you if you were able to work beside other adults with ADHD, to be understood and accepted, and to finally tap into that potential you maybe didn't even know you had? Do you have a vision of where you want to be, but are feeling stuck because you aren't quite sure where to start? That's where coaching can help. Our fall season of coaching and accountability groups is just around the corner, which means registration is starting this week. So if you want to join us this fall, go now to coachingrewired.com to get your name added to our fall interest list. Once you've added your name, you'll receive instructions on what you'll need to complete so you can join us for our fall kickoff registration event this week, Thursday, August 17th at 12 p.m. Pacific, 3 Eastern. And for this Thursday only, if you get registered with us this week on August 17th, you will be able to take advantage of $800 off the cost of registration when you join sections 1 or 3. This is a one-time promo only and will only be offered this Thursday, August 17th, so don't wait. Registration is by invitation only, so get your invitation by going to coachingrewired.com and get your name added to our interest list and watch your email for instructions. Every season, our coaching members work together to learn how to ask better questions, plan their days, weeks, and months, and discover that they do not have to do any of this alone, and neither do you. So what are you waiting for? Kick off your personal growth and invest in you by going to coachingrewired.com to get registered for our fall registration event. That's this Thursday, August 17th, and come grow with us. Hey, and if you're listening to this after the fact, go to the website and find out when the next time you can register is. That's at coachingrewired.com. All right, we are back with Vernon Foster the second. I forgot your T. Vernon T. Foster the second.
Don't forget the T.
Can't forget the T. All right, I will dot my I's and cross my T's here. Okay, so I had said right before the break I wanted to share another test taking strategy. So when I was in college, I did have extended time for exams, the accommodations. And one of the things that I did to advocate for, because I realized that I didn't like taking tests in the testing center.
Interesting.
Because I wanted to be able to ask my professor a question, like if I needed like a clarification question. And of course, they would never actually like tell you the answer, but I've always been really good at reading body language. And so I learned how to ask questions in such a way that like even just the way of their non-response would give me all the information I needed. And so just if you're in that college phase right now and you're like, all right, I got to figure out these strategies that work for me, just something to consider, because that advocacy piece is such an important part of really owning and maximizing those accommodations. Okay. So where are we picking this up here now?
So like in terms of the diagnosis, once I got the diagnosis, I was probably a day late and a dollar short because I actually ended up losing that gig. And I felt a certain type of way about it, right? I advocated for myself. I really, what I was proud of is that I advocated for myself being in a new role, actually designed my own role and took it to the HR team and took it to my direct report. And they were like, in the history of ever being in HR, I've never seen someone create their own role. So I was like, here's what I need to do for this company. I need to basically be the front man. I need to be the spokesperson. I need to go on podcasts. I need to be doing video. It was basically everything that I was like extremely good at and like didn't take a lot of energy. Like it just felt natural. But they were like, no, we're not going to let you do that. So that's kind of how that chapter ended. And then fast forward to like after that, right? Part of me healing and from this journey is like, I just kind of like did a deep dive into ADHD, found your podcast, found Renee's podcast.
Mm-hmm.
She has a really dope podcast. So she's great. And so as I started to do some more digging, I found this study that, and I think this is something that we talked about in the preview. It was like, I don't know if it's a longitudinal or that's the right name for it, but basically they did a study and they basically found that African-American children were 69% less likely and Latino children were 50% less likely to receive an ADHD diagnosis by the time they reached the 8th grade. So for me, that was kind of like, I was like, man, like, wow, I think that was when I realized that I needed to write this book, right? That was when I realized I was like, somebody's got to be talking about this shit, dude. Like, it's super important I can't believe that no one's talking about this stuff.
I can tell you're a storyteller, so I want to ask you a question in this way. So when you first read that, if you can create almost like a metaphor, when you read that stat, what was that like for you?
It was like, I was pissed. I was pissed off.
Pissed off how? Say more.
I was like, why didn't anyone tell me this shit? Like, my whole life could have been different. You know, I try not to be a coulda, woulda, shoulda like guy, but like, it kind of made me think about like, what would my life be like? Right? Like, would I be further along? Would I have more of the things that I wanted? Would I be less judgmental? Would I be in therapy less? You know, it felt like a gut punch.
Like a gut punch.
Yeah.
Because whenever I think there's starting to be a slow sea change. I wouldn't say it's it's not a tidal wave, but like I remember when I first started going to the ADHD conferences, 11, I think 12 years ago now, and I was just and it's actually true with I think all mental health conferences that I've been to. Like
Yeah.
it's a sea of white people, and I'm just like, what the hell? Like why? And so I always like really appreciate non-white people coming out to talk about stuff around mental health because it's like people need to hear their voice. So first of all, thank you for doing that. I just so curious as to the journey for you as a Black man diagnosed later with ADHD. Like, how has that factor been, and what do you think is maybe not understood by most people?
Um, I can't speak for every Black person, right? Or, but I can't speak for myself, and I'm sure there may be Black men out there that feel the way I do, but and I think I don't remember the interview or the woman that I heard, one of your podcast episodes I was listening to, but like I think she said it very succinctly, and it was like you can't be Black and
Mm.
right. You can't be Black and have ADHD. You can't be Black and have a mental illness or a disability, right? Because the world is already against you. The odds are already stacked against you, right? Like I'm supposed to be in jail or dead by the time I'm 18 years old, right? Statistically, or in a gang or something like that, right? That wasn't my fate, right? I had probably more resources and access to things that other people who look like me didn't have, right? So in many ways, I would say I'm probably more from a privileged side of the perspective of the spectrum. But there is still challenges, right? That like Black men have to face every single day, right? And then you compound that with racial injustice, you family obligations, and then you stack ADHD on top of that. Like it's just like it's a lot.
Mm.
It's a lot. I'm only scratching the surface and I'm still navigating my journey trying to figure it out. But the thing I wish I had was somebody to be like, hey, the gentleman in my HR department to be like, hey, like just go get a diagnosis, dude. Like spend a couple $100. Like just go get it'll make your life easier. Easier in quotes, right? Because it doesn't change the fact that I still have to walk out my door as a Black man. I still have to live in America as a Black man. I still have to get in my car and drive, right? Like those are things that are never going to change, right? But I think with something like this, like the more that I'm aware of like how, and ADHD from my standpoint affects every aspect of my life. It's not just work. It's my relationships, it's work, it's my finances, it's everything. And so it's full spectrum. So the more that I have an understanding of where these things like RSD, right, come in to the picture, maybe it helps me equip me to navigate life a little bit easier, in quotes, than if I didn't know, right?
Mm.
Because I already have all these strikes against me, and that makes life hard as shit, right? Just right. And I'm not asking for sympathy. I'm just stating facts. The facts are the facts.
Yeah.
But it does, even with all of those things, the more that I've understood about my health, business, finances, like the more I've done the homework, the more I've done the work, as they like to say, the more I've started to understand how I can navigate these things a little bit better in life. And I think that that's the best gift that we can give somebody, right? Just helping them maybe see a different perspective, helping them tap into some tools that maybe they didn't have or didn't have access to.
Mm. I definitely do agree with you that the idea that ADHD permeates every aspect of life is something that's annoyed me when someone says, no, not everything is about your ADHD. I'm like, well, actually, yeah, it can't kind of separate like how I show up in the world and having ADHD. So kind of everything is related to the ADHD.
Yeah.
So Do you think that there's certain aspects for you of being a Black man and having to navigate the world with something that is very visible and navigating the world through something that is invisible, like ADHD? How does one affect the other for you?
If the way I envision it, if the way it shows up for me is that it affects all aspects of my life, and then there's this layer that society has placed on top of me because of how I look, right? It's going to make it even that much more challenging, right? In the case with work, right? Let's take that for example. If I can't find an opportunity, right? This is probably why I'm an entrepreneur, right? If I can't figure out how to make money working for a company because I can't stay engaged in my work and I have to resort to street life or other alternatives of making money, under the table or right, like shady stuff, that's never been my journey. But I know that that's a real possibility for somebody. If you can't graduate from high school, right, and you can't get a degree because you have a disability or you can't retain the information or the teachers or the professors aren't taking the time to put you on game and realize that maybe like you need a little bit more time, right? Like your whole year, I mean, I could have easily been in a prison or in a jail cell. And I try not to forget that, right? I try not to be like, oh, I'm above those people, right? Like all it takes is one wrong move or me getting thrown out of school or my mom. I grew up in a single family household, right? My father, he wasn't a street guy or he passed away. He's a hero. He died in the military, right? But these are things that like, I mean, you single parent household, ADHD, if I would have grown up in a different community, my life could have looked completely different. Mm. So I'm blessed to have had the resources, the opportunities that I have, right? But I'm not going to sit here and pretend that like these things don't exist. And it's not a reality for a lot of people who look like me. Yeah. A lot of people who look like me don't get extra time on the test. A lot of people who look like me don't go to college. They don't have mentors. They don't have people pouring in. They don't get the right books. They don't get access to entrepreneurship and business grants and opportunities. And so how do we level the playing field? How do we become better stewards of the gifts and the opportunities that we have to show other people that it's possible, to invest in other people, to invest that time in our youth, our communities, people that don't look like us, people that maybe we disagree with, people that may be on the blue team or the red team, right? Because it's all about teams now. I think that's important. And I think it's beyond like a check, right? Like I think it's something that we all should strive to do in our lives because the world isn't fair, right? Mm-hmm. Life isn't fair. We live in a world where I think in the Western society, at least in the US, I've had the gift to be able to travel and go to different countries in Central America, Asia, right? And we have it pretty good in America, but I don't think a lot of people like to spread that around. There's a lot of hoarding. There's a lot of hoarding of knowledge. There's a lot of hoarding of information, wealth, right? But what we're doing is we're perpetuating that cycle. We're keeping this, and maybe it's intentional, but for me, it's like, how do I take what I've learned, package that up in a way where it can support somebody else and not need anything in return? If I get something, great, cool. Like if I make a bunch of money and I'm rich, like that's great, right? But that's not my intention. My intention is to realize that like I have these things, these gifts, these lessons, and it's my duty to be a steward of those things to help support other people that look like me, people that also don't look like me, to have this conversation with you, right? Like if I was closed off and said, oh, like I don't, people that don't look like me, they ain't on my team. I don't talk to those people, right? Like I'm perpetuating the cycle, right? Because of this conversation, somebody's going to be able to listen to this and be like, yo, I connect with Vernon. Like I resonate. I may not resonate with Eric because he doesn't look like me, but had Vernon not had that conversation, I wouldn't be able to, listen to the podcast. So I think it's important. I think it's really important that we kind of take a step back and see like, maybe I do have a lot of privilege, right? Maybe I do have a lot of things that I've been given that maybe I didn't have to work too hard for, right? Or like I had both parents in the household. That's kind of like a leg up, right? Like my parents helped me get a loan that like for my first home. Like that's kind of a leg up, right? Like a lot of people don't like to maybe talk about those things because it's like the flex doesn't look as good if like you got support, right? But from where I sit, everybody needs support, even me. So,
well, I agree with that, and thank you for that. Let's take a one more quick break here. When we come back, I would love for you to share some of the kind of your main tips, the things you've learned over the last year or so, as you're learning to navigate ADHD as a Black man.
Sure.
ADHD Rewired is not brought to you by the following product because it doesn't actually exist. Do you suffer from pentastrophe daily? Is your desk cluttered with an army of rogue pens, abandoned paper clips, and wayward sticky notes? Say goodbye to stationary chaos with the revolutionary Desk Dynamo 5000. Introducing the Desk Dynamo 5000, the ultimate pen and stationery organizer for all your runaway writing utensils and stationery assortments. The Desk Dynamo 5000 features things like the Penzilla slot, tame even the wildest unruly pens. This supercharged slot holds writing utensils of all shapes and sizes, whether it's a humble gel, a bashful ballpoint, a sassy Sharpie, a quiet quill, or even a fancy fountain. Never again will you have to dash and dig just to find your favorite one. Other features include the enchanted eraser realm. This magical compartment keeps all your erasers safe and sound, ready to erase any mishaps in a snap. Your erasers will be so happy they'll never want to wander off again. Also featuring the Paperclip Corral. Say yeehaw to the wild paperclip rodeo. With the Desk Dynamo 5000, paperclips will line up neatly in their own designated space, saving you from the eternal struggle of untangling them like spaghetti. Unless you like that kind of thing. The next feature is the Serene Sharpener Sanctuary. Keep your drafting tools sharp and tranquil in this zen-like corner and achieve perfection with ease and grace. Your friends and colleagues will be so envious of your orderly desk, they'll wonder if you hired a professional organizer, or may even wonder if you still need to have that ADHD card. With the Desk Dynamo 5000, everything has a designated spot. No more digging through the depths of your desk. All your stationary dreams are just an arm's reach away. So bid farewell to the pen and paperocalypse and embrace the ultimate organizer with the Desk Dynamo 5000, where marker madness ends and stationary serenity begins. Warning, may cause stationary envy among friends and coworkers. Do not use Desk Dynamo 5000 if you enjoy chaotic desk adventures. ADHD Rewired is not responsible for any newfound stationary addiction. I don't know about you, but I'd love it if the Desk Dynamo 5000 existed, because some days I swear my favorite pen has legs and has run away on me, even though I could have sworn that I put it right here. Nope, I'll look for it later. But what we don't need to look for is a supportive community of wonderful neurodivergent people just like us. Like in our award-winning coaching and accountability groups at coachingrewired.com. We even have a free Facebook group, or in our adult study hall community at adultstudyhall.com, the ADHD-friendly online co-working space. Whether you need on-demand body doubling or guided sessions for cleaning, organizing, writing, or your most dreaded tasks, we have sessions for all of that and more, and that's at adultstudyhall.com. Or you can join our Patreon community at adhdrewired.com/Patreon. Perks start at just $5 a month, and support can start at any amount that makes sense to you. Want to try a little group coaching? Patrons at $25 a month can jump in for our monthly coaching calls every fourth Tuesday of the month. You can get an hour of my time with a few other people. Otherwise, get everything ADHD Rewired at adhdrewired.com. That's adhdrewired.com. All right, we are back with Vernon T. Foster the second.
You have the T this time. You got the T. I like that. It's regal. It's regal.
It's great. All right. So you you've written some stuff about ADHD and ADHD
Sure.
and being Black. And what are some of the tips that you would want to share, especially like, for all listeners, but also especially for listeners who are Black?
Yeah.
Yeah, why don't you share your wisdom?
I think the first and most important thing is get a diagnosis. Get a diagnosis. And that's a huge thing for our community, right? Because with these things, right, with a lot of the things I was talking about earlier, like the last thing that you want to do is put another label on yourself, right? As a Black person, I don't need any more labels, right? I'm just trying to make it. I'm just trying to survive, right? So like to be able to, this is a big step, right? And it may take therapy. It may take leaning on a friend. It may take listening to some podcasts and to understand that you're not alone. But I think that's like the unlock. That's like the lead domino, because once you can get the diagnosis, it opens up a lot of different things. So I would say number one would be get the diagnosis.
How do you get past that first domino though? Because I think there's, for good reason, I know a lot of people in the Black community who don't trust, especially psychiatry, and for good reason, based on the history in this country of what has been done to Black people in the 50s. I mean, there was sterilization. Like, there's legit like cause for concern. How do we get beyond that?
Yeah. I think everybody will have their own like motivator. Mine was pain. Right? It was like, how many more jobs are you going to get fired from? Like you got to figure this shit out, Vernon. You're 36, life's coming, like you don't have kids yet. You're not married yet, but you will be. Like, do you want to be trying to figure this shit out while you're, having to juggle all that? And in a sense, I'm still going to be like working on it. It's always going to be a work in progress.
We're always going to be a work in progress.
But yeah, exactly. But it's the keystone, and it's going to be different for everybody. That was what it was for me. I can't sit here and tell you what it's going to be for other people. But for me, pain is a great motivator, right? Like, it's like, I needed to put a Band-Aid on it. I needed to like heal the pain, right? And for me, it was like, all right, I've done everything else. I've tried it my way. That's clearly not working. I guess I just got to get a diagnosis, even if that makes me feel like shit. And I feel like I'm putting another label on myself. And I feel like it's a cop-out, or I feel like it's an excuse that I'm making for why I don't have the things that I have. I had to own all those things and just be like, yeah, and I'm still going to get the diagnosis. So I'd say that's number one.
All right. What's number two?
Number two is to tap into the tools. Once you get the diagnosis, right, I know you've been doing this for a long time in teaching in your programs, and like that kind of is like the unlock. So it's like, okay, now that you have the diagnosis, for me, it was like the 5 stages of grief, right? It was like, okay, like I have this diagnosis. Yeah, okay, like I'm kind of sad about it. I think about like the gut punch that I told you about, like what if my life would have looked differently. Yeah. And then it was like, nah, man, these people are wrong, man. How have I been able to get this far without, having a diagnosis? I don't need medication. I don't need, right? The ego kind of kicked back in a little bit, right? The ego was like, you can tell them they're wrong, right? And then it was just like, oh shit, okay, like I have ADHD. I can accept that. It's a diagnosis. It's not a death sentence, right? Like my life isn't over. And there are people who've like worked through this, and that I can find, that coaches and mentors, and I can lean on professionals, podcasts, I can educate myself, right? So that's like the tools, right? Like exercise, eating. For me, mindfulness and emotional intelligence have been huge for me, right? Like RSD, which is rejection sensitivity dysphoria. I think
which is not like technically a medical. William Dotson is a psychologist who came up with this term, and there's some controversy around it.
Sure.
But I do think the idea of rejection sensitivity, just as that experience,
sure,
I think that is something that is very, very valid to talk about, because and I think one of the reasons why it almost gets confused, people think that it is an actual valid medical diagnosis, I think is because of when the information about this started coming out, so many people in the ADHD community related so strongly to this. But if you go to a lot of different doctors and you bring this up, they're gonna be like, "What are you talking about?" Like they'll have no idea.
Yeah. So for me, like the emotional intelligence, and it's really just understanding how you, as a human, emotionally, like what's going on with you, right? going to school, it's getting the PhD, the MBA on like your emotionals, and being able to understand like how to regulate those things, right? Because I know for me, I'm a super emotional person. I always have been. I was called a crybaby a lot when I was growing up, right? Like I lead with my heart on my sleeve. And so that is very noble at times. And at times that can get me in trouble, right? And then I can be very defensive, confrontation, right? So, like, the more that I can understand when I'm being triggered by something or when I'm feeling off or when I need to do some yoga or when I need to go exercise or when something doesn't feel right, I can step back, right? It gives me the power back. I'm not being ruled by my emotions and on this roller coaster of going up and down. Or on the extreme of that, being reactionary to something that comes up, right? It's like I'm coming from a place of neutral. I'm the observer of my emotions. My emotions don't rule me. I'm in control, right? Doesn't mean I don't experience those things. Doesn't mean that I don't get pissed off or annoyed or like I don't yell or like I'm this Buddha like woosah dude, right? It's like I still have those emotions. The difference is I'm aware of those emotions and when they come up. So like that's when I say the tools, it's EQ, it's understanding what's out there. It could be meditation, it could be yoga. I don't know what it is for other people. I know it is for me, right?
So
and
you
I
meditate
don't
regularly?
I try to. I did this morning. I try to, but I'm not really good at it. That's not true. I wouldn't say that I'm not good at it. I would say that consistently keeping it as a practice hasn't been as easy as say yoga or working out or
Okay.
running. I love running right now because it's just I feel like I'm clear. I feel like energetically my body it gets my body in motion and then allows me to transfer that energy. This may sound weird into my
It
work.
doesn't sound weird at all. And I think it's also important to know that like mindfulness meditation does not need to just be sitting and watching
Yeah.
your breath. You can absolutely engage in mindfulness meditation while running.
Yeah.
Like when I used to do a
Yeah.
lot of mountain biking, like where if I lose my focus, like I'm gonna be in a world of hurt. Right.
Yeah.
And so you have to be so present to what you're doing in all parts of your body and what your balance is. It's this very specific type of body awareness that when I used
Yep.
to do mountain biking, where I would feel very centered sort of in my hips. And like, 'cause I knew like that's sort of where my balance needed to really, really be. And so I was always like sort of in my body thinking in that space, which like kind of just helped to block everything else out. It's also why I now ride motorcycles. I know like I'm on a machine that could easily kill myself if I don't pay attention to what the hell I'm doing.
Yeah.
There's lots of ways we can practice mindfulness without having to just sit and watch our breath.
That's a good call out. And I think a lot of people get lost in like the mindfulness meditation piece because they're like, oh, I can't sit here for 5 minutes. And it's like, there, you could walk. Walking is a form of meditation. Really? Yeah, it is. Right. And I think that's the key is that whatever I'm doing, it requires a lot of presence.
Yeah.
And sometimes, or most times in my work with what I'm doing, I don't experience that same presence. I'm not as locked in. And so it recalibrates me to be like, this is what it feels like to lock in on something. How can you transfer this energy, this mindset, this focus into your podcast or into your client work? And so that for me is like one of the tools.
What are some of the other tools?
I think support is a big one. Support from family and community. And this isn't necessarily a tool, but I think this is something that supported me. It's like if you, it's really hard to do this alone.
Mhm.
I think with any diagnosis or with anything in life, but I think especially with like ADHD, because I think the tendency that I've seen is like for people to be like, oh, well, everybody has ADHD, right? Or like slick comments like that.
Yeah.
That person may not, they may have ADHD, they may not. More than likely, they probably don't, or
What's
they
your
probably
response when someone says that?
I kind of like just like you're an idiot, you know, like you don't, or it's like you can't really speak for like it's insensitive, right? And I shouldn't call them an idiot, but like it's a very the reply lacks empathy.
Yeah.
And it could be because they don't understand, right? It could be, oh, well, like I never knew that it was like that to be to like that you have to like always like be looking out like when you a cop is behind you when you're driving down the car in your rearview mirror, right? Like some people just may not ever experience it, so they have no clue, right? So
Yeah.
they're oblivious. And I think that's maybe where those kinds of comments come from, which goes to my point of like why supporting communities is vital, because there are going to be people that you need to be with on the journey that are experiencing the same thing to you, that can relate to what you're going through. As an entrepreneur, you and I both, we know this, right? Like if you're around a bunch of people that work a 9 to 5, nothing wrong with people that work a 9 to 5, but as an entrepreneur, if you're around other entrepreneurs, they're going to be like, look, dude, I suck today just like you. Like we missed, payroll, last week. And you're just like, oh man, I'm not alone, right? So there's a little bit of like that, like you don't feel alone on the journey.
I was just thinking that working a 9 to 5 sounds worse than having like my mother come with me to school for a week.
Yes, I would take
man.
that. I would take that. And nothing against people who work 9 to 5. I love you guys. You guys make the world run. It's just not necessarily works for me after lots of evidence of experimenting with that. So support and then family. I think community is one thing. The cool thing about community is that like you don't get to choose your family, but you get to choose your community. You get to choose who you surround yourself with. Very powerful thing to remember. But your family, on the other hand, right? Like you love them or hate them, they're your family, right? So it may take educating them, right? Because my mom didn't know what ADHD was back then, right? She just like, what are these people trying to tell my kid? Like they ain't putting no label on my son. Like the only label I'm giving him is a king and a genius, right? And I love my mom for that, right? And nothing wrong with that, right? But if, for example, with my partner, I've done a good job, or at least I think I have over the last year and a half of like helping her understand like why I forget things. If it's something that's important, why we need to have an invite on the calendar, because if it's not on the calendar, then it's not real, So I think that could be another form of support from your partner, right? Like even if it's just when we have conversations about important things, how can we document these things in some way, or set a reminder for myself? Not saying that you put it all on them, because that's not fair. It's not their responsibility. But like I always say, how do I help you to help me to help us? Right?
I love that.
You help me help us.
Because there's a difference there between codependency and accountability, right? Like a codependent, and we talk about this in our coaching groups. Codependency is, hey, remind me to do this thing, would you? That's not somebody else's job to remind you to do the thing, right? It's like, I'm going to do this thing. I will let you know that I did this thing at this day and time. If I don't check in with you about that, could you maybe follow up with me?
Exactly.
Because one, you're giving that other person the option to say, no, I can't. Right.
Sure.
And it's not, the onus is not on them. It's on you seeking that support. Vernon, do you think that there's any differences maybe in the conversation when you're talking with family as a Black person who there's more this stigma around mental health stuff, when you're trying to get support, connection, understanding from family, from your community? Do you think there's like certain nuances in that conversation that need to happen?
I think the question you're asking, is there a difference between the support, like the understanding of what the support needs to be from family versus community?
Well, how to communicate that support, how to communicate that you have ADHD.
Yeah, it's tough. I haven't figured that out quite yet with like my mom. Like I've said that I've had that I got a diagnosis, and I think like it may be tough for parents. They don't want to see you in like a negative light, right? So I think that may be tough for parents. And me and my mom have a great relationship. She's an amazing woman, super powerful. I love her. She's an inspiration, But I think that conversation I'm still like figuring out how to navigate. It does help with siblings if they also have ADHD. So for example, my brother, he has ADHD. And for him, it's a lot more extreme than me. And so like, we just kind of like make jokes about it, right? It's just like, yep, and you got ADHD, like whenever he forgets it, like, oh, I'm gonna call you back later. And I was like, yep, the birds got him or something like that. When we're having conversations, right? And he's like going a million miles a minute and he's like talking about something, and I'll have to like pull him back in. So it's cool. It's cool to have like a sibling that has it. I can kind of see it like as it unfolds. I'm like, oh, he's about to go off the rails in 3, 2, and 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 I love him, right? Like I do anything for that guy. We have a fantastic relationship, and but we kind of joke about it. And his wife does a really good job of like reeling him in and like making sure there's like the areas where he like needs support. Like she does a really good job. We kind of like have fun with it and kind of make light of it because we know that
It's
it's something
healthy.
that we
It's a
both
healthy
struggle.
thing to.
Yeah,
It's a healthy way to cope.
yeah,
It affects all of us differently, but I think it's important to have a common shared experience. I think it
yeah.
doesn't matter, where you come from, what you look like. Being misunderstood and feeling like you're the only one is one of the most like isolating, like
Yep.
depressing experiences there is. That's why community is so important.
Yeah, no, I 100% agree with that.
Any other tips you want to share?
I think we hit on this earlier. It's kind of like the work in progress mindset. I think as I've gotten older, I just realized that like no one has their shit figured out.
Nobody.
I think
Nobody.
in your 20s and maybe your early 30s, and when you're a teenager, you don't even care. But in your 20s and your early 30s, you're so like gung ho, or at least I was. I can't speak for everybody else, but I was so gung ho about like, I have to have it figured out. My life has to look exactly like this. And I think that created a lot of angst, that created a lot of like disappointment, a lot of self judgment. And I'm still learning how to not be so critical. Doesn't mean I don't hold myself accountable and I hold myself in high regard and things like that. But just understanding that, like a good friend of mine and mentor, Tony Grebmeyer, he always says, there's nowhere to get to, right? And sometimes I hear that voice in my head because it's true, right? It's like we're super ambitious. We have businesses, we have goals, we have dreams, we have projects, we all these things we want to launch, right? And like we have a vision of what we want them to look like. And sometimes the reality doesn't line up with the expectation. And so if you are just so attached to what it needs to look like, that can create issues, right? At least it has for me.
It's the
And
idea of
so
letting go of the outcome, focus on the process.
yeah, and that's where like the work in progress is just like a construction site, right? Like think of your life as like this ongoing construction project. Like it's never going to be finished. And even if it does get finished, right? Like you're going to probably be like, I want to go and do something else over here now, right? Because that's human nature. Like we always want to create and we're on to the next thing, right? It's why we built airplanes. It's why we go to outer space. It's why we sail across the world. It's like we have this innate desire to, especially ADHDers, we want to do the next thing and create and right. And so if you are fixated on everything looking a certain way, then you may just be setting yourself up for disappointment. So that's just a thing that I kind of just let people know is that just to be aware of.
I've been enjoying this conversation so much so that I kind of lost track of time a little bit. So hopefully y'all are still with us. Vernon T. Foster the second, the website, ADHDblack.com.
Yep.
Any final thoughts or places you want people to reach out to you at?
Yeah, so you can find all my information there, ADHDblack.com. And yeah, I would just say like, get support. You don't have to do this crap alone. You're not like weird or there's nothing wrong with you, right? Like you're a unique individual. You have gifts to give to the world and like embrace that, right? Like part of owning your ADHD and getting the diagnosis is part of that path to like embracing who you are and all of the things that you love or maybe don't like, right? It's the process.
Well, Vernon, the only thing I would disagree with you on right here is when you said that you're not weird. I would say embrace your weird because I think we're all a little bit weird here. So
that's true.
It just takes more executive function to try to be something we're not.
Yeah. And interestingly enough, I had a conversation with a friend yesterday, not yesterday, a couple days ago. And he was like, what's crazy is like the more I've leaned into my uniqueness, as you define it as weirdness, who I am, the more opportunities have just started to like show up for me. It seems counterintuitive, but I agree with you. Embrace that weirdness because that's the thing that separates you from the sea of sameness, right? And who wants to be like the blob, right? The people that we're drawn to, the people that we're magnetized to, the celebrities, the athletes, the entertainers, the authors, they're different, right? And so I agree with you there. Own that.
Vernon, thank you so much for this conversation. I've really enjoyed it and appreciate you sharing your journey and your insights. So thank you so much.
Thank you for having me, Eric. It's been great, man.
It's been a pleasure. Thanks. This is Eric Tivers. Thank you for listening, and congratulations for making it to the end. ADHD reWired is more than just a podcast. We are a community focused on learning, growing, and connection. The website is ADHDrewired.com. You can find time-stamped summaries and additional resources for each episode. Apply to join our free and secret Facebook community. Learn more about our award-winning intensive online video-based coaching and accountability groups. Join the Adult Study Hall virtual co-working membership community. Find all the other podcasts on the ADHD reWired podcast network. Sign up for my email newsletter to get exclusive content that you won't hear anywhere else. And use the search tool to find episodes on specific topics. You can do all of this at ADHDrewired.com. While you're there, click on the Patreon button. If you are a regular listener, consider making a monthly contribution by becoming a patron. If you are able to financially support my work, it would mean a lot. This show is free to you, the listener, but it's not free to produce. Plus, patrons get cool perks like ad-free episodes and access to recordings of coaching calls, and $25 a month patrons can join me once a month for a group coaching call. You can follow me on Twitter at Eric Tivers. You can like our Facebook page at facebook.com/ADHD reWired. If you're a coach, therapist, or related professional, connect with me on LinkedIn at linkedin.com/Eric Tivers. Subscribe to ADHD reWired on YouTube to see selective interviews and other videos I've made. Podcasts change lives. You can make a difference in someone's life by spreading the word about this podcast. Mention it in your online communities on Facebook, Twitter, Reddit, or wherever you hang out online. And be sure to share it with your friends, family, your therapists, your coaches, doctors, siblings, parents. And if you, your coach, therapist, doctor, or ADHD support group leader would like a pack of podcast postcards to hand out, you can request those at the website, ADHDrewired.com. If you are a member of CHAD, ADA, or any other ADHD support group, please be sure to tell them about this show and all the shows on the ADHD reWired podcast network. You can even show them how to download it on their phone. And if you really loved this particular episode, please hit share on your podcast player. I'm only one person, and I do count on you to help spread this message. One of the biggest things that you can do to support this podcast and help other people discover it is to leave an honest rating and review on Apple Podcasts or any other app that supports reviews. And don't forget to hit subscribe so new episodes are automatically pushed to your favorite podcast app. Looking for more ways to listen and learn? Get a free audiobook and a 30-day free trial at Audible by going to audibletrial.com/ADHD reWired. Here is my list of must-listen-to audiobooks updated July 2021. Nonviolent Communication by Marshall Rosenberg. Attached by Amir Levin and Rachel Heller. Atomic Habits by James Clear. The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team by Patrick Lencioni. Crucial Conversations by Carrie Patterson. The Coaching Habit by Michael Stainer. The Body Keeps Score by Bessel van der Kolk. Rest by Alex Sujong Kim Pang. The 5-Second Rule by Mel Robbins. Make It Stick. The Science of Successful Learning by Peter Brown. The Productivity Project by Chris Bailey. Meditation for Fidgety Skeptics by Dan Harris. Change Your Questions, Change Your Life by Marilee G. Adams. I always recommend to my coaches and admin that they read that book. The One Thing by Gary Keller, a required reading for all of our coaching group members. Procrastinate on Purpose by Rory Baden. The 4 Tendencies by Gretchen Rubin. The Art of Asking by Amanda Palmer. And if you're looking for something a little bit more magical, I have fallen in love with the Harry Potter series, and the narrator, Jim Dale, is amazing. And of course, if you haven't yet boarded the Brene Brown bus, all of her stuff is great, starting with Gifts of Imperfection, Daring Greatly, Rising Strong, and The Power of Vulnerability. And if you're an entrepreneur or leader, be sure to check out her book, Dare to Lead. Do you have something that you would like to share? Click on the podcast tab at ADHD reWired. Click the button to be a guest at the top of the page and schedule a 15-minute interview. This is Eric Tivers, reminding you to keep learning, growing, and connecting. Self-care is not selfish. No matter what you get done or don't get done, you are still enough. And no matter how hard it feels, we can do hard things. And we don't need to do them in the hardest way possible. Thanks for listening. I'll catch you next week.